I'm proud and excited to announce that the new book, Transform Your Body, Transform Your Life, is now available. I've put the links to grab your copy from Amazon worldwide in the show notes, and I can't wait to see what you think. As a thank you for listening to the podcast, email podcast@rntfitness.com with your receipt, and we'll send you the free ebook version to start reading immediately. If you like a sneak peek of what's inside, you can download the first chapter at rntfitness.com/book. Also, you've heard me talking about the power of journaling for a long time, so I'm happy to announce we've now got customized RNT journals in store. There's a mix of prompts and freestyle writing, which you can take a glimpse of on rntfitness.com/journal. Just a quick one before we get into this episode. If you're in the UK and you use supplements, I'd highly recommend checking out Reflex Nutrition, where they're giving up to 40% on all their range if you use the code PTRNT at checkout. I've been using Reflex for nearly a decade, with their microwave being one of my favorite whey proteins. It's grass-fed, hormone-free, and digests so well compared to most on the market. Check out their full supplement range, including all your transformation basics and plant-based alternatives on reflexnutrition.com, and use the code PTRNT at checkout for up to 40% off. Today's episode of RNT Fitness Radio, I'm joined by Sandhya Domah, who discusses the concept of human design and how to use it to perform at your highest level in everything you do. After having my own human design reading a month or so ago, I thought some of the insights were fascinating, so I wanted to bring Sandhya on to share more. In this episode, we discuss the 5 different types we generally fall into and what each one means. As a bonus for you all, Sandhya is offering 10% off a human design reading for any bookings made before 8th of July. The link is in the show notes if you'd like to try it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. So welcome to the show, Sandhya. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Akash.
No, it's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to diving in. For the listeners here, I spoke to Sandhya probably about a month ago now, maybe just under a month, yeah. And was on the receiving end of some of her amazing work in human design. And I thought during the session, the first thing I was thinking of is I need to bring her onto the podcast and expose the work to the masses. So here we are. So to kick things off, what is human design? And give us a bit of a background of yourself and how you came to practicing human design for your work.
Sure. Well, a bit of a background. I guess what I am doing today is that I am doing human design sessions with people. I guess I haven't really found a label for what it is that I do right now. But essentially what I do is, so I give human design readings, and essentially what I've really been called to do more and more is to actually really sort of focus on, entrepreneurs, and really sort of help them understand how they can create their business from a place of that is more natural to them, and create their business from a place of flow. Because what I've found is, being an entrepreneur myself, is that, most of us, we end up wanting to become entrepreneurs because, one of the reasons is because we want to achieve a sense of freedom and we want to be our own bosses. But I think that it tends to be kind of a false sense of freedom, because ultimately we're still tied down by, all the ways that we think success can be achieved. And especially in the entrepreneurship community, there's so many rules and so many, people telling us how it should be done, right? And what human design actually really tells you is that there is actually no cookie cutter way of doing things, and that we each one of us have our own individual way of going about life. And obviously that can be applied to a bunch of different things. But so I guess that's kind of what I'm doing now, and finding my kind of calling within that calling.
How did you come across it? What were you doing before? How did you stumble across human design?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're doing a podcast now, and actually stumbled across it while listening to a podcast.
Oh, wow, okay.
At a time when I was kind of really, really lost, right? Because by then, the 2 things that were happening in my life is, one of them was that I had been playing by the rule book in all of the sort of jobs that I'd been doing up until that point. I'd been playing by the rule book. And even though I'd been successful to a certain extent, I wasn't really deeply sort of fulfilled. That was the first thing. And the second thing is that over the course of, say, 10 plus years, I kept hopping from one thing to the next. So I'm an electrical engineer by training, and worked as an engineer for a bunch of years while I started off my career, and then ended up doing a bunch of things like working for a big company, working for a startup, and then going more into the business side of things by first, going back and getting an education in business, and then working on the investment side of things, and then going back to the startup and working on the really operational commercial side of things. And throughout it all, I kind of wondered whether, I was finally going to find something and kind of stick to it like everybody else was telling me that I should, and stop being all over the place. And I guess when I started my first business, I was like, okay, that's it. I've seen it all. I've seen entrepreneurship from different angles. And now, I know the rule book and I can go off and do it. And it didn't work out as I thought it would, obviously. And I was really at a place where I was like, okay, what next? And I was completely lost because I thought that had been it. That was it, right? Like the first business that I started. And so I came across human design just completely randomly by listening through to this podcast. And it really, really piqued my interest because I was like, how is that person, so the person talking at that time, I was like, how is that person understanding, who I am and what it is that I'm going through on such a deeply personal level? And obviously I ended up going down that rabbit hole, and here I am today.
So what is human design? For those listening who aren't sure what it is, what exactly is human design?
Yeah. So basically, human design is, I guess we'll call it a system, right? Human design is a system that incorporates a lot of ancient wisdom, really. And when I talk about ancient wisdom, it's wisdom like the Hindu chakra system, the Chinese I Ching, so I know some viewers who might be familiar, and a little bit of astrology with modern science like quantum physics and genetics, right? It's really an amazing melting pot of ancient wisdom and new breakthroughs in science, right? And that essentially enables each individual to understand their own unique blueprint, right? Because, say, the premise of human design really is that each one of us has a unique way of operating. And I think that we all kind of understand that on an intuitive level. However, what tends to happen is that, and we're all subject to it, right? But we've all been conditioned by society, right? By our family, by our peers, by people around us, to behave in ways that don't necessarily mirror how we truly operate at a fundamental level, right? We have all of these layers kind of on top of us dictating, the way we're doing things, but those layers have been added on by the shoulds of society, by, the way that we think we're supposed to show up, because that's how we've essentially been conditioned, right?
Yeah.
And essentially human design then helps you to reconnect, obviously, with your individual essence in a way. It will help you peel back all of the layers of conditioning, right? To get back to who that initial person is really fundamentally, at the end of the day, right? So
one of the first things you said to me is you need to find out your date of birth and your time that you were born and where you were born. So when I text my mom asking for the details, and she gave it to me, and then she said, "What? Why?" And I said, "Well, this is what I'm doing it for." And then she said, "Isn't that like we have that thing called the Kundli?" So in Indian cultures and in Hindu cultures, it's called the Kundli, and it's like a birth reading where they do some of this. So she was intrigued from that perspective and how it sort of differs and how it works compared to that. And I think you've just mentioned there that there's a lot of Hindu influence. Yes,
exactly. Well, essentially, there is a lot of, there's the chakra system, actually, which is present, which shows up in human design. And there's bit of astrology as well, right? Which is why essentially we're asking for the birth details and the exact time of birth, right? And astrology, by asking those details, is looking at the planetary alignments, of the time that you're born. And basically human design is kind of using the same sort of precept as well, right? Looking at the planetary alignments, but more specifically looking at sort of the energetic portal at your time of birth. Because according to human design, and that's the kind of maybe more woo-woo side of things, is that human design says that you kind of already know what your purpose is, and what what gifts that you need to be able to carry this purpose out in your life. You already know that at the time of your birth, right? But then when you come in, right, obviously you get layered on by all of these conditionings from society, and you forget who you are, right? And it's not so much about like finding out who that authentic person is. It's really about sort of like peeling back the layers to uncover the person that you already are, right? But yeah, so it definitely has, elements of sort of Hindu philosophy to it. But the distinction, I would say, between human design and astrology, or Hindu astrology, or any type of astrology, is that human design is not a predictive tool, right? It's not going to tell you what is going to happen to you or that sort of thing. Human design really kind of gives you, your way of functioning right now, right? It'll tell you, what is your most optimal way of functioning and what your gifts are and how to move around in the world in a way that is much more natural to you. And even though some people might have themes that will show up, in their human design that might kind of be predictive sometimes, it kind of is not really, right? And that's the kind of distinction and the difference.
So when you get the date of birth, the time, the place, what are you using that with the information, and what do you then gain from that data to then relay on to the person you're reading?
Yeah, so essentially, I mean, your human design reading is completely free, right? Anybody can get it, right? And for the viewers listening, you can literally go to www.mybodygraph.com, and you might probably link it to the show notes afterwards, and putting all the details that we've just mentioned, i.e. your birth date and your birth time, your birth location, and then it'll pull up a chart for you, which is your human design, right, chart. And you can start gleaning some information from it. And it's quite complex, as you'll see, right? But right off the bat, you can start gleaning information from it. And maybe we can, start off from there and go into the different types.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
To give a sense of what kind of information that you're getting from it. And so, as I said, right, human design it's actually pretty complex, right, when you look at the chart. But let's say the first entry point, right, into human design are what we call the types, right? And there are 5 types. And so what I can do is kind of go into each type and give a little bit of a flavor of what each type is, to give a sense of what kind of information that you can actually get, right? And so, as I said, there are 5 types, right, in human design. And you'll get that, right, when you pull up your chart. You'll have obviously like a graphic with kind of like a circuit and all of that. I mean, you'll see. It'll make sense to you when you actually go in and pull up your chart. But then on the right side of it, you'll get a bunch of information. And in that bunch of information, you'll see next to your type, right, it's literally written type there, you'll see either a manifestor, generator, manifesting generator, projector, or reflector. So those are the 5 types. And before jumping into the 5 types, what I'd like to say is that obviously each of us have our own individual chart, right? I still haven't come across 2 charts that are similar. I think there's over 2 billion configurations. And so, yeah, obviously we have our own way of operating, but that doesn't mean that we're each supposed to just go off in our little corner and do our thing independent of what everybody else is doing. The beauty of the system is to show that it's like we are, each of us, like little pieces in a big puzzle, right? And obviously we each have our own individual shape in that puzzle. But then when you put that puzzle into the big picture of things, something kind of shows up, right? We have a role in the bigger scheme of things. And when you look at the 5 different types, you'll see that the 5 different types actually interact very beautifully one with the other. So getting into the 5 types now, right? So the first type is the manifester. And the manifester is about 8% of the population. And the manifestors are kind of the trailblazers of society, right? They're the ones that make stuff happen. They're the ones that initiate, right? And it's funny because when we think of, so a lot of the success languaging, right, that we have, especially again in the business world, in the entrepreneurial world, is about go, make things happen, just go do it. Nike's motto is, you just do it type of a thing. And it's interesting because a lot of that success languaging is actually modeled after the manifester, which is only about 8% of the population, right? And the reason why that is because historically, when I say historically, we go back 200, 300, even 400 years ago, most of the leaders, that we had actually were manifestors. The leaders were actually disproportionately manifestors because of their capacity, to kind of, to trailblaze, to initiate change, to rally people, that natural sort of capacity to become a leader. And obviously we'll see that the concept of leadership as well is evolving over time. So that historically, it was the manifestors who had that tendency of sort of stepping up and being the leaders. And that is why a lot of the success languaging in today's world kind of rests upon them, even though society is kind of changing, right? But the bottom line is that the manifestors are the ones that make stuff happen. And it's a very spontaneous energy, right? And the way that a manifestor works and operates is that they need a lot of freedom. And I would say the main conditioning, that a manifestor is under in society is that the manifestor energy is it can be a very polarizing energy, because it really is a case of, because they're the trailblazers, right? Whatever they're initiating, whatever changes that they are spurring on, will tend to have the effect on people that people will either be in or out. There's this very polarizing effect. And some people will naturally jump on your bandwagon if you're a manifestor, and other people won't. And they might be completely even against the change or the action that you're trying to initiate. And the biggest conditioning on manifestors, those who don't know that they're manifestors, is that there is this difficulty to embrace that bigness. They tend to become people pleasers because that's what they feel that society expects from them. They tend to want to ask for everyone's opinion. But the reality is that a manifestor who's operating in his or her true essence isn't really supposed to be asking for people's opinion. They should be informing other people as to what it is that they want to do, and then let people decide for themselves whether they want in or out. Right?
What would sorry, just to interrupt there, what would trigger a manifestor to want to ask for people's opinions versus going into their flow state of leading and letting people understand what they're trying to do?
A lot of manifestors, for instance, growing up, because obviously, you still have that manifestor energy when you grow up. And what tends to happen is that as a manifestor kid, for instance, you've probably heard over and over and over again. And that might have been a theme, growing up, whereas you've heard it so many times, like you've been stopped in your tracks when you're trying to lead, or especially for, manifestor girls, for instance, where, society kind of really wants kids in general, and maybe in some societies, more especially girls, to kind of conform and be in a box and be meek and to really follow the crowd and to be people pleasers. And that's the conditioning that you're kind of grow into and grow up with, so that when you actually become an adult, you're still carrying that conditioning with you that is stopping you from stepping into that thing of, I can embrace that power. Because a lot of manifestors, generally for people, it's kind of hard to think that whatever it is that you're doing might cause some people to not be okay with it. It's not necessarily easy for everybody to understand that. And as a manifestor, that's something that they have to reconcile with, that whatever it is that they're doing, that they have to be okay with some people not necessarily agreeing to what they're doing.
Yeah, it makes sense. So that's the manifestor, which is 8% of the population. And then you've got the manifestor generators. Is that the next one?
Yeah. So the next one I want to get into is the generator, because the manifesting generator is actually a mix of both. So it's easier to understand what a generator is. And so the next one is the generator, which is what I call the Duracell bunny. And they are about 35% of the population. And the generator actually is the one that has a big capacity for work, right? It's interesting because we kind of all know somebody around us who, when they're doing something that lights them up, they just keep at it and they just can't seem to stop, right? And the big chances that they're either a generator or a manifesting generator, which we'll get to in a second. But the generator has a big capacity for work. And when you look at work, the way we see it now in the conventional, traditional sense of the 9 to 5, it actually really is a system that suits the generators and the manifesting generators more than the other types. The other types are not actually really well suited for a 9 to 5. So the generators have a big capacity for work, but here's the caveat. They have a big capacity for work only when they do things that they're excited by, only when they do things that light them up. And it's almost like that excitement is what powers them. That excitement is what generates energy in them, and not only generates energy for them, but also ends up benefiting the other people, because it's almost like they're creating a kind of like an energy vortex around them where they're attracting other people and opportunities around them, right? And people end up sort of wanting a piece of that energy, and they go away feeling motivated or excited and to do things that they've probably been putting off for a while, And so as a generator, what they have to understand is that their sort of let's say their primary function in society today is to reconnect actually with their desires, with what it is that lights them up, with their gut, basically. And that's the other interesting piece, is that we hear a lot about listening to your gut, right? But in human design, not everybody has a gut that is really talking to them in a consistent way, right? And generators and manifesting generators are the only ones actually who are ruled by their guts. And that gut is a very sort of like black and white type of a thing. Is it a hell yes? Or is it a no? If it's a hell yes, then go and do it, type of a thing. And that's how they how they have to navigate through the world. And it's interesting because a lot of other types want to be generators because they feel that generators have it easy in the sense of they just need to follow what excites them, really. And it's by following what excites them that gives them energy, right? And the main conditioning actually for a generator is that work is not meant to be fun, right? Because other people naturally pick up energetically that generators have this big capacity for work, and they end up sort of maybe, convincing generators to come and work for them and do work that they're not necessarily excited by. And so the main conditioning for generators is work is not meant to be fun. Work is meant to be heavy. Put your passion aside. There is no such thing as, doing something that you're passionate about or others' needs come first. That's another big one for generators. Others' needs come first. Duty. I have to satisfy other people before I satisfy myself. But the interesting thing for a generator is that it's almost like it's by being quote unquote selfish, i.e. by them following what it is that lights them up, that they end up being of bigger service, obviously to them, but also to the rest of the community. Right? That's the interesting piece for them. So that's the generator.
Already I'm thinking, and I'm sure I'll ask the same question again at the end, is I know I'm not one of these already because I've had my reading from you. I don't want to tell the listeners just yet, but I would listen to both of those and I think, I could be a bit of that. I could be a bit of this. And I'm sure people are already thinking, I'm a bit of this, bit of that. Is that normal? Should you be thinking like that? Or is it something you can just apply to different scenarios of your life, if that makes sense?
Yeah, a couple of different things. So when it comes to you specifically, it's completely normal for you to identify with every single one of the types that I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
Right? Because, and we'll come to your type at the end. And I don't know if you want to reveal which your type
maybe
is.
go talk to other people who are feeling this then.
Yes.
Or unless you want to answer this question later on.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer it right away and obviously maybe come back to it if there's something that I might have missed. But yeah, it's completely normal for people to actually identify with other types. And there can be a bunch of reasons at play here, right? Some of the reasons might be, again, because we have a sense of who we want to be, who according to society models the best way of us achieving success. I can tell you straight off the bat that everybody who listens to those 5 types wants to be a manifestor, especially if you're a business person, especially if you're kind of a go-getter. Everybody wants to be a manifestor, and it crushes everyone when they find out they're not a manifestor, right? Because that's the model of success that we've put on a pedestal, and we kind of unconsciously want to be that, right? So that can be one reason. The other reason can be, and obviously it'll become clear as I go through the different types, the other reason can be that obviously conditioning, again, which is a bit of what I just said, but also a generator a lot of times can feel sometimes like a projector, which we'll get to, because, a lot of generators that I do readings for, they're like, what do you mean I'm supposed to have all of this energy to carry out, to do all of these things? Like, I am completely exhausted and depleted. I don't get it, right? And that's because for a generator specifically, they get energy when they're doing something that excites them. But the flip side is also true. They get depleted in the long run, or the medium to long run, when they're doing something that doesn't light them up. And so they end up feeling like completely the opposite of what their type should be feeling like if they were to be operating true to how they're supposed to be functioning. That makes sense.
Yeah, completely.
Right? So the next type is the manifesting generator, as we just said, which is also 35% of the population, as we mentioned for the generator. And as the name says, the manifesting generator really is a mix of the manifestor and the generator, right? And as such, we'll have kind of traits that a combination of both of those types. But the interesting thing then that comes out for the manifesting generator is that as an MG, so manifesting generator, they end up having a path which is very nonlinear. Right? They are the ones that are interested in so many different things, sometimes even at once, and probably things that don't really make sense. Or when you're looking at a CV, for instance, or when you're looking at somebody telling you their story, sometimes, if it's a manifesting generator, it might look like, oh, that doesn't make sense at all. It just really looks like it's hopping from one thing to the next. But that's correct for a manifesting generator. They are interested in a lot of things. Their path is supposed to be very non-linear. And that is really, really hard for an MG to embrace, because we live in a society that wants everything to be very linear, where everybody wants to have a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, and wants to know that if I start doing things today, that's going to lead me to something in 5 years, 10 years down the road. That is really hard for an MG. But what they're here to actually really show to people by embracing the non-linearity of their path is to kind of show to others as well that success, whatever that looks like, can be achieved in a way that is not traditional, in a way that is non-linear, in a way where you can still put one foot in front of the other, and where you're putting that one foot might have make no sense to you or to whoever else whatsoever in that moment, but it ends up making sense afterwards. It absolutely does. And so I would say the main conditioning for a manifesting generator is really society telling them over and over again to focus, to choose one thing and stick to it, to not be all over the place, you know? And that advice can definitely be very relevant to some people, but it's not actually correct for an MG, right?
Just on that, so when you come across someone who might be jumping around, feel they on the outside they look like they don't really have any structure, they are kind of winging it as they go along. We typically think of that as disorganized. They won't get anywhere. They need to focus on one thing. But in reality, if they're living within their flow or their correct human design, they're actually on the path to their individual success. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And there might be a bunch of reasons, you know, why you might kind of be all over the place. And obviously I'd have to look at the chart. But generally speaking, if you end up being a manifesting generator type, you know, you have to understand that non-linearity is who you are, you know. And if, for instance, you are interested, if you're an engineer, but you're also interested in photography and you have like a cooking show, a YouTube cooking show and whatever, it's not being all over the place. It's you actually using your energy correctly.
Yeah, understood.
You know? So that's an MG. And the fourth type is the projector that we briefly kind of mentioned before. And the projector is 20% of the population. And I often didn't say that, but I love obviously doing human design readings in general because it's fascinating and I learn so much because no chart is the same. But I particularly love doing human design readings for projectors because I think that they are the ones that probably have been the most conditioned by all of the five types, because we live in a world essentially that's kind of ruled or modeled after manifestors and manifesting generators. Manifestors just because historically they've been the leaders, and generators and manifesting generators just by the sheer volume. They're like, 70% of the population. So that's a lot, right? But the projector, which is 20%, actually has a very, very different way of operating in life, right? And what they have to understand is that the projectors are really here to tweak, transmute, guide, refine, right? They're not here so much to do as to see, right? And here's what I mean by that. And I immediately go to this analogy that I've heard, which is brilliant. It's not mine, but I've heard that analogy and I use it all the time because I think it's just it illustrates, so much the different types. But like, if you imagine all of the types of animals, on a plane, and you can imagine, say, the manifestors as gazelles hopping from one thing to the next, and you imagine, the generators and the manifesting generators as horses, running around with their sheer force and doing their thing. And then perched up on a branch, you have a small bird. That small bird doesn't necessarily have all of the power, all of the energy to go on the plane and roll around in the mud and do like all of the animals are doing. But what it does have is a very unique vantage point of sitting perched on top of that branch and really seeing, having a bigger picture of whatever is going on and really actually being able to say, well, actually, see that horse, going around wanting to go from A to B and actually not really taking the most efficient route to get to B, right? I, as that bird that has this unique vantage point, I'm able to then go and tell that horse, whatever, hey, actually, the most optimal way to get to B is this. And I see that, And so as a projectors, really, they're the seers, really, of the population, right? And they tend to really be obsessed with processes and systems and efficiency and different ways of doing things. And they just intrinsically, naturally see something that others don't. And it's funny because projector kids growing up, they tend to get shut down a lot because obviously they see something that other people don't see, and they will tend to barge in and go, okay, I think you should do it that way. And they tend to be labeled as bossy, or they tend to be labeled as know-it-alls, and then they get shut down because nobody wants to hear what other people have to, correct them. But yeah, so they have a very different way of operating. And obviously the biggest conditioning for a projector is that they want to be like everybody else in the sense of being able to do. They're like, why am I so tired if I'm doing all the time? Why can't I be more like the generators who just seem to be able to just go on and go on and go on and not get tired? Why am I not more like that? Well, the truth is that you're not supposed to be like that. That's not the gift that you're bringing to the world. And when I said previously that, the concept of leadership, the way we're seeing it now is really evolving. I think it's really evolving more towards the projector way of seeing things. Because before, maybe leadership used to be somebody who would kind of step up and kind of get power from sheer force and rally tons of people around and really tell them what to do. Now leadership is looking more like that person who's really able to spot, the perfect person for each position and put those people in their right position so that they can actually function to their optimal capacity. And then the projector really kind of having much more of an open door policy going, look, you know what? I'm the leader. My door is completely open. If you have a problem with whatever it is that you're doing, come see me. I'll help you problem solve, and then you just go. Because I can see things that you can't see. I can see efficiencies and whatever it is in whatever area that you see those things, right? So that's the projector, basically. It's kind of more of a modern way of leadership that we're kind of more and more evolving towards. And so the last type, which is the reflector, which is what I call the chameleon. The reflector is actually really, really rare, right? It's just about like 1% or 2% tops of the population. And they have a very unique role in society. And so the reflectors essentially are the mirrors of society, right? They're the ones that, are supposed to stand in the middle of their community or society in general. And just by looking at how the projector, the reflector is, you can immediately gauge the health of the society or the community around that reflector, right? It's almost like the reflector really is a gauge for the community. And you can tell, the state of the community by just seeing if the reflector is thriving or not. If they're at the center of the community and they're thriving, they're doing so many things and really being successful and achieving tons of things, or just really being fulfilled, you can absolutely be certain that the society that reflector is a healthy society and operating according to how they're supposed to operate.
So with a reflector, is it based on the way they feel in different scenarios, in different communities, in different environments? Or is it if they have a good gut feeling about something?
No.
If those two are different?
Yeah, they are different. They absolutely are different. No, actually, it's not so much about gut feeling as you said, it's about how they feel.
What is the difference between that? What's the difference between like a gut feeling and like a general feeling?
Yeah, a gut feeling, right? According to human design, those are very different terms. You have gut feeling, you have instinct.
Yeah.
So those are very different. So a gut feeling, according to human design, is a very visceral excited reaction. A gut feeling actually comes from your sacral chakra, which basically is saying from from the area below your navel. And it really is this very visceral yes or no. I'm super excited. It's actually the center in your body that governs desire and creativity, but desire in the very pure sense of the word. And so it really is about, am I excited by this or not? And it's a very binary thing. It's, you immediately know when you're kind of excited by something or not, and that's your gut talking to you. And you have that compass operating for you if you're a generator or manifesting generator.
So if someone says to you, trust your gut, is that only applicable to a certain person?
Yes. The problem is that gut and intuition tend to be used very interchangeably in society because we don't really make the difference. Sometimes when people are saying trust your gut, probably they mean trust your intuition, trust whatever. But in human design, those are very different. What an intuition is not so much that very visceral yes or no, hell yes, I want, I desire this and I'm excited by this. What intuition is in human design is really this sense of inner knowing, of sometimes it can manifest as, I know how I know. I don't know how I know. I can't break it down for you. I can't make sense of it. I just know. I know it in my bones type of a thing. That is one of the ways that intuition can show up. For other people, it can even be auditory. For other people, it can be smell, in different ways, right? And that is intuition. But for a reflector, it really is about a sense of well-being or about how they're feeling. If they're feeling, bluesy, moody, burnt out, crappy, or if they're feeling exhilarated and happy and like they're in their flow, that is reflecting the people that person is with. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with their intuitive hits or their gut feeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It really is about a sense of well-being. And the reflector is able to kind of really gauge how other people are feeling around him because they really take in other people's energies at a very sort of it's not anything that they have to think about. It's just a very energetic process. They really take in all of what the other person is about, what all that other person is experiencing. They really take it in, right? And they really act as mirrors, right? It really is a mirror getting held up.
Yeah, so if a reflector's feeling good around someone, they're feeling vibrant, they're feeling happy, feeling just content around someone, is that a sign that they feel good about that person or a sign that the other person's feeling good?
It's both.
Yeah, okay.
It's both. It's both. Because what is really crucial for a reflector to be able to thrive is the people that reflector surrounds himself or herself with.
Okay, yeah.
They really need to put themselves in an environment where they feel good. And what dictates whether they're feeling good is obviously their environment. Like the environment is key. The people that they're hanging out with is key, is fundamental. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is that reflectors actually really have to move around until they find, that crowd or that location, even physical location where they're feeling good, because that's when they'll be really able to thrive and they go on and achieve amazing things. But a lot of times what ends up happening is that a reflector ends up really being on the margin of society because they're taking in so much of what necessarily isn't really good for them that they end up kind of checking out, and they end up feeling that there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Just for the listeners wondering what I came out as a reflector. So it's probably why I'm asking more questions in the reflector section.
Yeah.
So those are the 5 types. Is there anything else on the 5 types you wanted to mention?
No, that's kind of essentially it in a nutshell. Obviously, there's a lot more in the sense of, so the 5 types are actually really the entry level into human design. But then it kind of goes deeper than that, because then you have the types, and then you have the profiles, and then you have your strategy, your authority, which is kind of some of the things that I've touched upon. But strategy and authority really is about how you make decisions, how each of the different, not necessarily types, but each of the individuals actually makes decisions, which is crucial. And here's the one piece about decision making as well, which will come as a shocker to a lot of people, which definitely came as a shocker to me, is that as powerful as the brain is, our brain is not designed to make decisions, right? And decision making is actually really in the wisdom of the body. And that's when it's really important to tune in to whatever, in whatever way your body is talking to you to really make a decision, whether that is instinct or whether that is gut or whether that is something else going on in your chart, that will really help you make decisions.
Out of interest, what are you?
I'm a manifesting generator.
Okay.
A combination of manifesting generator.
And probably the best person to ask is once you know what you are, how do you then live in alignment with your profile? Like, for example, since you discovered this, how have you changed your life to live in alignment of your profile?
Yeah. Oh, that's been huge. I think I might have changed like 180 degrees. I think there are two things really. The two approaches to this. The first is really kind of discovering who you are in the sense of obviously your type. And my type tells me that obviously I'm supposed to have a very non-linear path. And as I say, one of the main things that I was struggling with at that point in my life when I discovered human design is to really start questioning whether that was a problem with me. Because I kept, if you look at my history, every 2 years or so, I would change everything. When I say everything, it's really everything. I would change careers, I would change companies, the size of the company, I would change countries. It was just really all over the place. And so knowing my human design really allowed me to just give me awareness that was kind of how I was supposed to function. So a lot of stress associated with that just kind of dropped immediately. That was the first piece. And then the second piece is that human design will actually tell you what are some of the gifts that you have, how to hone in on them, and a lot of those things for me were actually repressed, and it's funny because like my human design chart says that I am quite creative, and I've spent my entire life thinking I wasn't, because I've evolved in a society that tells me that it's all about, the logic and it's all about the math and the physics. And that's why I ended up doing electrical engineering. I always thought of myself as an Excel person and really good with spreadsheets and really took pride in that even, know? And since knowing my human design, I actually started exploring more of the creative side of me. And I realized that it's actually true, who knew? So that's the other piece. A bunch of things like that, where it's really about reconnecting with who you are by kind of knowing more of who you are, but also by knowing who you're not. Because a lot of what human design will tell you is the places where you're most likely to have taken in conditioning from the outside world. Things like, for instance, and that might be interesting for your crowd as well, things like having a routine, having consistency, having discipline, having the motivation to do things. Well, actually, here's the shocker. Not everybody is actually really wired to have the extra energy to power through things that might be unpleasant to them. Some people have it, some people don't. What we call motivation today is actually the capacity to power through certain things that you're not necessarily, that you find kind of unpleasant.
Yeah.
To do it with, the prospect of having a carrot at the end of the road. And some people do it better than others. And that's just also something that you have in your wiring, And what ends up happening is that a lot of people who don't necessarily have that extra, say, oomph of energy to kind of push them through it, end up feeling deep shame about it. Of, why am I not being able to wake up at 5 a.m. every single day and go for a run like XYZ is doing, or like XYZ is telling me that I should to achieve the success that I want, and actually finding that out about myself that I don't have, by the way, that little thing of motivation, actually kind of shed away an extra layer of conditioning.
What are your thoughts on essentially using your reading and using it as this is not a follow-up to what you just said. This is more generally speaking, like using it as an excuse to do things or not to do things. So you do something like this and you say, I'm doing this because I'm X profile, or I'm not doing this because I'm this type of profile. Is there danger in that? Or is there sense behind it? What are your thoughts?
I think that off the bat, what I would say to that, and obviously, yes, of course, there's a danger to that, because I can certainly see how, for instance, a projector who fundamentally is supposed to be a badass, every single type is supposed to be a badass if they use their energy correctly. But like a projector can definitely say, oh, I'm not supposed to do so much, so I'll just potter around and not do stuff, right? Of course, everybody can use that as an excuse, as with everything. But I think that fundamentally, obviously it's all about the awareness and the consciousness with which you're using it. But also, what I'm going to say is that human design is not a belief system. It's not something that you don't even have to believe me when I tell you such and such thing about your profile. What I usually tell the people that I do readings for is that now that you kind of have the blueprint for how you're supposed to function and exchange energy with the world, go out and test it out. Just turn yourself into your own experiment now. Of trial and error, of figuring things out, of testing and understanding, okay, this works for me. This doesn't work for me. This is how, because ultimately I might give you the structure and the blueprint and the framework by which you're meant to be operating, but I certainly don't know the ins and outs of how you really operate. There's only one person who does, and that's you. And so it's almost like I'll tell people that your human design is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of the journey.
Yeah. Of
reconnecting with who you are. Right? And if you're using your human design as an excuse for not doing things, ultimately, I think that you will not necessarily achieve what it is that you want to achieve, right? And that's going to be a bummer, because human design, the first thing that human design tells you is it's actually much more of an empowering tool that tells you every single one of us actually is meant to do amazing and great things in the world, and with each of us meant to have a purpose. We have a purpose that when we find that, we're supposed to be in flow in life. So if you're not finding your flow and just pottering around and not doing anything, that means you haven't found your purpose, and that means you still have some work to do, if that makes sense.
The self-awareness is key, as always.
Yeah, exactly.
So within the 5 different profiles, you said you can get all this information there online. Give an example of how it goes deeper. So for example, let's say you've got a manifesting generator. How many different types of MGs within an MG, if that makes sense?
No. Okay. So here's I'll break it down for you. So basically, you have, obviously, as I said, the entry point is the manifesting generator. And then I would say the second layer is the archetype. Let's say you're a manifesting generator, but there are 12 different ways that you can show up. Let's say you can be, and that is me completely stereotyping it, but let's say you can show up as like a sad manifesting generator. You can show up as a happy manifesting generator. In this case, I mean, there's kind of 12 different archetypes that you can show up, and that applies to all the 5 different types, right? So you have the type, you have the archetypes, you have the different, obviously, decision-making strategies, right, which is your type. And then going deeper, you have the centers. In human design, you have 9 centers, which corresponds to the chakra system. This is where the chakra system comes in. According to the chakra system, you have 7 chakras. In human design, you have 9 centers. And that's because the heart chakra and the solar plexus chakra split into 2 in the human design chart. But what those 9 centers are actually telling you is where you take in energy from the world and where you broadcast energy to the world. So quickly, if you go to your chart, you'll see that some shapes, so you'll see a bunch of shapes. right? You'll see triangles, you'll see squares, you'll see a diamond shape in the middle, etc. And those shapes are either colored or they're not. And if they're colored, in whichever way they're colored, that means that that is the energy that you're showing up with. This is yours. This is your energy that is consistent to you, that you're supposed to broadcast to the world. That's what you're giving. That's your gift to the world. And all of the other centers where, it's white, that's when you're taking in from the world. That's the energy that you're taking in. And that's kind of where a lot of times we get conditioned, right, by society. So those are the 9 centers. And then it goes deeper, because that's where then, as another layer, this is where the I Ching comes in. The I Ching has 64 human archetypes that it plays with, right? Basically, I Ching says that human beings have come on Earth to explore the whole spectrum of human experience through 64 archetypes. And so you have that in human design, and that will show up as sort of circuits and numbers in your human design. Those are the numbers, right? And then those numbers form kind of circuits, kind of an electrical circuitry. You'll see that will be connecting the centers. And some of those centers are open completely. And what I mean by open is they're completely white. Again, that's where you're taking in energy. Some of them are colored, but partly. So it's only half of the channel that's kind of lit up. And that means you have the theme of that sort of I Ching archetype. Or if it forms a channel connecting both centers, you have another theme that emerges, right? So that's another layer. And then there's another layer as well. It's like when you look on both sides of the actual chart, you'll see little symbols of planets and all of that. And that's where the astrology piece comes in, where you can see kind of different influences of different gates. And then you have the arrows. You have 4 arrows on top next to the head that point in different directions. And each arrow has a different significance. And the direction in which they're pointing also has a significance.
There's a lot of different, it's almost like a spider web. Once you go in one, you've got all these different layers to then sort of decipher between. And I want to understand that's probably where you come in and help people make sense of all of this.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously getting to that, depth is, you need to get sort of really deep into it.
So tell us a bit more about what you do here. How do you come into the mix of, you've got the initial reading, but what do you personally do in this process of human design?
So right now, what I do is that I give one-to-one readings, literally helping people understand, how to function, in a way that is much more aligned to who they are. So that's the first piece that I do. And now I'm kind of in the process of adding more offerings to what it is that I do. Because again, as I said at the beginning of the chat, is that I really feel like my calling is really about helping maybe like people more on the business side of things to actually come up with a business or work on their business in a way that is much more true to them. And then around that, there's a bunch of pieces. So what I'm going to be adding in the mix of the things that I'm offering is partnership readings, because there's one piece is actually your individual reading. But then let's say, for instance, you have a business partner or even like a relationship partner. That also affects your energy, because now you have 2 charts, 2 energy fields interacting that will come up with a third energy. So that also kind of, that will give a different sort of reading, or at least will give you a sense of how to interact best with, let's say, your partner or your business partner. So that is something that I'm going to be giving. So it's more along the lines of business partnerships or relationship partnerships. And what I'm actually really also passionate about is actually doing human design readings for children. Because just imagine, as a parent, raising your child according to their human design, and actually right off the bat, not subjecting them to all of the conditioning that you might have been subjecting them to while they grow up, so that they can move more into, ease and flow in their lives without necessarily having to go through all of the conditioning and deconditioning process to find out who they are, right? So those are the things that I'm kind of thinking right now, even though, on my website you're only going to have those one-on-one readings and the follow-ups. And then, I have a bunch of different projects
Amazing.
that I'm thinking of.
If someone wants to get a one-to-one reading with yourself, what's the best way to get in contact?
I would say right now through my website, it's www.shiftingparadigm.co. So that's shifting.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, there you go. That's probably the best.
And they can just book in through there?
Yeah, they can just book in through there.
Awesome. Yeah. We'll put that in the show notes. I think it's something everyone can gain something from. I think even if you gain one nugget about how you operate, it can really fundamentally change. One for me that's been playing out a lot is the decision making. I think you described to me how for big decisions, and even in decisions in general, my feeling has to be the key driver here, the way I feel. But also for the bigger ones, I will feel up and down about it for a long time, and then I'll sort of settle on one idea. So it's important that I've noticed it this week actually. On Monday, something came up, and my initial reaction was a knee jerk, but I didn't press send, or I didn't press publish or whatever. I thought I'd wait. And the next day I felt really good about it. And then the day after I was like, oh no, I should do the other way around. And today I'm feeling good about it. I know tomorrow it might be the other way. So I've just said to myself, going to give myself a week to make this decision. I'm not going to rush it because I've just got to move through that yo-yo period of how I feel through it. And I think that's been probably the biggest takeaway I've had from my reading with yourself.
Yeah, cool. And that's big because we live in a society that is so much based on immediacy. It's like you have to know, and you have to know now, and you have to be making rapid fire decisions now. And that's not necessarily the case for everyone. And the interesting thing is that the sort of paradoxical thing on the face of it is that it's while waiting, for some people at least, those who have to wait, and for you it's longer periods of time, it's by waiting that you end up gaining time at the end of the road, because then you end up not committing yourself to things that aren't necessarily correct for you, and you're not sort of spreading yourself thin by jumping around from one thing to the next, doing things that you're probably not supposed to be doing in the first place. Yeah,
it's been really interesting that. I just noticed. And the other one actually was interesting was your comment about structure. And you said to me, you're probably not someone that needs consistent structure all the time. One of the things I pride myself on is structure. And you said that, okay, maybe you're someone who needs a lot of structure and then needs periods of zero structure. And one of the things I did last year, which always made me feel really good, was I traveled 10 times in the year. And what I typically did was it'd be 3 to 4 weeks of extreme structure. And then I'd go away for a couple of days or whatever and have no structure. And I always felt that was my balance. And I really noticed it now, because since you said it, I've really noticed the fact that because of lockdown, I've not had that ability to go and have those periods of no structure. And I've noticed that sort of starting to weigh down a bit more, because I find it difficult to recreate that same feeling when I'm at home. So I try and do now instead 1 day a week where I'll have no structure compared to normal. Every Saturday I won't have my normal structure, and then the rest of the week I'll follow as normal, and that gives me that sense of contrast that keeps me functioning well.
Awesome. I think that's another piece another pill that's hard to swallow, because that sense of not so much structure also, but even routine sometimes. Yeah. Because we're just so fed with like all kinds of routines, and what's your morning routine, and what's this and what's that, and that's great for some people. And the reason why all of these things are out there is because it's obviously worked for some people, and they want to put it out there. But the really key thing is to understand is that, well, maybe not everybody is supposed to even have like a routine, or is supposed to, be able to, rise and shine at whatever time in the morning and actually just kill it. Some people aren't really wired and designed for that. And it's really about, as you say, self-awareness, and really doing away with the shame that you might be feeling if you're not, being able to do that successfully.
Any parting words for the listeners?
I would say really the key, and I think which is a lot of what you you tell to your community, Akash, which is amazing, and which is I've picked up your book, by the way. I've started reading it. I haven't,
amazing!
I haven't finished it, but I already love the initial pages, which really says that it's all about the long-term changes that you're doing. It's not so much about getting fit within a month and then getting there and then asking yourself what next. But what I'd like to say is that if you really, really want to make long-lasting, sustainable changes in your life that will really, last maybe for a lifetime, the key here is, definitely mindset. But even further than that, the key is to really know yourself, because you can push and shove through changes and through doing things that you're not necessarily wired to do. You can do that for a short period of time, even some years at a time, sometimes. But there is a time when that will catch up with you. There is a time when that might fall away. So the key really is, if you want long-lasting changes, whether you're applying a diet program or a fitness program or whatever it is to really kind of start knowing yourself really deeply. And that requires, looking at all of your limiting beliefs, all of your beliefs about yourself, really critically having the courage to do that, because it's not an easy process, and really start to shed the tears of the layers, really, of what you should or shouldn't be doing.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on, Sandhya.
Thank you, Akash, for having me.
Thank you so much for being here today on this episode of RNT Fitness Radio. I'd love for you to do a quick little favor for us. Please head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating, leave a comment, and share it with your family and friends. If you're interested in learning more about how to transform your body and positively change your life, go to www.rntfitness.com and explore all our free content on offer. Thank you.